welcome to the London Architect podcast. My name is Lily Patience and I'm your host. I'm a recent graduate from the University of Birmingham where I studied geography. The aim of this podcast is to shed some light on industry opportunities in the construction, planning and design industry. Today we have Neel Dakshy with us from Neel Dakshy Architects. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Neel, would you like to tell us a little bit about your company and yourself?
Well, my company is me, myself and I. I'm a self-practitioner, as are, I guess, a large percentage of architects in the UK. And sort of various reasons why I prefer to operate that way. It's a choice. It sort of comes down to, I guess, my work history is that I've always worked with smaller practices, and I sort of found that the connection that I've had with clients has been much stronger working in a smaller environment. And doing that, I'd like to do, I don't know whether I'm a megalomaniac or a control freak, I like to do everything. So I like to obviously go out and meet clients to start off with, but I like making sure that I'm delivering everything. And I think having worked with practices where I felt that there are other issues at play, whether it's, I don't know, profit or for the practice or profit for
commercially driven.
Yeah. I get to choose who I work with.
Yeah.
I get to I guess, and they choose me as well. I think that's important when you work with people.
Do you build a better rapport with your clients because there's more sort of trust in it if you're the face of the company and you're the main man?
I think the clients look at it two ways. Maybe they think that I don't have the bandwidth to deliver what they're after, and then they might go for. I mean, I've been in situations. Increasingly, you have to pitch for work. I mean, although a lot of mine is through recommendation. Maybe occasionally I'll be up against another couple of architects, and they might be slightly bigger practices. And I understand why people feel that they'll get a better service from a larger practice because I might be spinning plates, I might be working on 5 jobs, 6 jobs, 7 jobs at the same time, and I can't necessarily hand over anything to anyone else. I do use freelancers every now and again.
Yeah.
But the flip side of it is that I am the one that's dealing with the job. And you're sort of looking at the work that I've done in the past, and you know that's off the back of the way that I work and what I've delivered. And I guess if clients are calling me up and that's what they want, the only way of delivering that is really to do it myself.
Yeah. Definitely. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your education and your journey into architecture? Where did it all begin?
Yeah, it was funny. I've been thinking about that a lot because I've got a son that's going to university shortly and he's doing all his applications. I'm sort of putting myself back in his perspective because I knew what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And he doesn't. Although when I was much younger, I wanted to design cars.
Okay.
So it's not disassociated.
It's not a huge jump,
But then I think I did a bit of work experience. I've been on building sites. I quite like being on building sites. I like the fact in particular that I guess if you're designing cars, eventually it goes into production and you see them out on the street, but you make stuff, you deliver stuff for people. It's a profession where I think it's a tangible result at the end of it. It's not like working in finance or other sectors that a lot of my peers went into. So from wanting to design cars and then flipping to wanting to design houses, I guess there was a point early on at school where they make you choose your subject so early.
Yeah.
So I dropped art very early.
How old were you?
Probably would have been about 12, 13.
Okay.
So I never did art for GCSE and I never did art for A-level, which was significant later on.
Yeah.
So when I applied to universities, there are different schools in the country and they all have different focuses. So some will be more artistic, like University of Cambridge, UCL, and then others. I went to Edinburgh in the end, and the reason why I did, I love the city, and that's one thing.
Yeah, it's
but
very important.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, you're going to be there, especially with an architecture degree, you're going to be there potentially for 6-7 years.
Yeah.
And then
what other unis was it out of for you?
I think Edinburgh was always number one. Manchester, Liverpool. I mean, it's very hard to remember now. I didn't want to live in London, being in London, because I'm a Londoner.
Yeah.
I wanted to get away because for various reasons I wanted to get away.
I think
Edinburgh's about as far as you can get, really.
Yeah, I have that.
But my school really wanted me to go to Cambridge, and they felt that I should walk into get a place at Cambridge, because I was academically strong, but they didn't really see that the real picture of Cambridge was that I needed a strong portfolio, and I'd given up art, and I didn't really want to go there because I wanted to go to a bigger city. But a school like Edinburgh, I mean, there like I say, there are artistic schools. There are some which are much stronger engineering-wise, much more technical, and you know really get into nuts and bolts of things. Edinburgh, we studied a lot of architectural history. I loved history. I didn't do it for A-level, but I loved history and philosophy as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Edinburgh must have been a perfect place to study architectural history.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, not just because of the city, but because of the teachers there as well.
Yeah.
Just come back from Florence last weekend.
Oh, wow.
And I'm just remembering all of my architectural history lectures with a guy called Dr. Jim Lawson and Ian Boyd White. They weren't teaching architecture, but I mean, studying an architecture degree is so varied anyway. We did photography, did architectural history, a bit of art history, philosophy, making stuff in the workshop. That was really important to me. I loved being in the workshop, and the workshop in the old days used to be open 24 hours, and sort of the health and safety issues you have now, you'd never be able to do that.
Yeah.
We'd be operating bandsaws and things on very little sleep. You had a studio culture back in those days where you'd all work in the studios because you weren't really working on laptops in your bedrooms. You were going in, using drawing boards, making models, doing metalwork, doing woodwork. I almost set the department on fire when I did a sculpture in lard with a heated element in the middle, and then the fire alarms all went off and it was catching flame.
This is part of the fun.
Yeah, but an architecture degree is great.
Yeah.
Photography, philosophy, all sorts.
You went to Andalusia, didn't you? Was that for a
year
out?
Yeah. When you study your first degree, and then you take a year out, and then you come back and do what's called a diploma. So the year out is your window into the working world. And I know sometimes you sort of end up as a little bit cannon fodder. Sometimes, and particularly if you're working for small practices, you might end up as, something really important in the chain. So, people will rely on you and you have to deliver stuff. And you get to meet clients and you get to do all sorts, and gradually you get your experience that way. So I don't know. I'd always tend to recommend that people go for whichever. They might not be massively prestigious practices, but I think if you're working on, say, a £500,000 project, you'll see a much bigger part of that process than if you're working on a £5 billion project. Because obviously your input,
you get a lot more satisfaction out of the final product.
And you will be taken to more site meetings, and you will be introduced to clients a lot more. Which I think is sort of the lifeblood of what I do is that client-based interaction. And that's probably I think that's probably the favourite part of what I do at the moment, is actually meeting families, because I work a lot with families. I don't work that much commercially, but I do a few commercial developments for old clients of mine.
So what was your first sort of job after university?
I worked for a company called HLW, and although there were 3 letters to the company, there was only one who was W. The H and the L were based in Kuala Lumpur, because they were 3 guys that worked together, and then 2 of them went off to make themselves, I guess, feel a bit bigger. They had 3 names in the practice. So I worked for Self-practitioner, and again, I had, more experience than I could necessarily handle. And I was definitely green at the time, because my work experience being, you mentioned it was in Andalusia. it was a great experience to live abroad.
Yeah.
But I didn't necessarily get the experience working that I should have done, that I would have done, because we're working on international resorts.
Yeah.
And they're not going to fly the Part 1 student out to Egypt to meet
of
the client,
course.
are they? So I never saw any of that. But in London, I did.
Did you speak Spanish?
I didn't, no.
So how did you find that?
Well, in the south of Spain, then no one spoke English, or not many people spoke English. So I just learned. It's an easy. I spoke French.
Okay.
And to jump from, and I'd done a bit of Latin at school.
So were you fairly fluent by the end of the year, or?
Yeah, I would have said so. Yeah.
And have you withheld that still?
No, not really. Although my sister, when I came back from Spain, would be 97. My sister went out after, and she hasn't come back since. She's a teacher. So so I have Spanish family. I have a Spanish niece now, so we do speak Spanish a bit, and we do go there a fair bit. Yeah. It's certainly not something that I'd say that I was fluent. It's not a language I'm fluent in.
It must have been a really big change, sort of working on these like fantastical designs on your university degree, and then coming back, working in London, starting, and then actually putting things into practice and then materializing.
Well, I mean, I remember my second job and the interview for that second job, and I got out my portfolio of all this amazing stuff that I did at Edinburgh with all my imagination and all this philosophy and all this theory, and the guys that were interviewing me were just looking at me blankly, not necessarily not understanding, but not particularly interested in ultimately they liked the way that I could converse with them and that I could convince them. That's part of what you learn at university. Is when you're at architecture schools, I haven't taught an architecture school for a long time. I did a little bit early on, but certainly when I was studying, and I don't know if it's the same now, but you do your work and you have one-to-one tutorials, and then after you have a semester, you present your work in front of all of your peers.
Okay.
And you have
it's quite
tutors.
Daunting.
Yeah, and you pin it up on the walls. I don't know whether you just project it now because it's all done on computers.
Yeah.
And there'd be, if there was a really good, we call them critiques.
Yeah.
But if there was a really good crit on, the whole studio would empty, and you'd go to the crit room and you'd watch someone sort of explain this amazing building. Or if there was a really bad one and the tutors were absolutely slaughtering, then the studios would empty, and you'd end up in the crit room and you'd all be watching it because it's some sort of masochistic pleasure that you take in.
Does that still happen?
I think it does. I mean, I've got a relative that's recently finished studying architecture, and they still talk about crits now as being sort of like the most exciting time. And also you're sleep deprived by the time you're going into the crit room, because you're having to, probably like you when you did your dissertation, you're staying up late nights. You might not sleep for 3 nights.
Yeah.
On the Red Bull. Back then it was Pro Plus. There was no such thing as Red Bull back then.
We still have Pro Plus.
Okay, yeah, but we'd be popping the Pro Plus, and then after no sleep, you'd have to go in front of your peers and your tutors, and they could be really, really harsh.
God, it sounds like a nightmare.
But it's relatively good preparation for
character building.
To people. I reckon it's probably a little bit more pleasant now, because I don't think you could be quite as rude as you could in any field now. You certainly couldn't behave that way in terms of really tearing someone apart. And I've seen students in tears running off, and it's not, But like I say, they were some of the more entertaining.
So obviously, when you moved into your career after university, you didn't have any of that, which must have been a bit of a relief. But what else was a big change to you?
Well, like you say, all of these fantastical designs you have complete control over, and then you're put into the real world, and you have to deal with, first and foremost, your clients. They're front and centre of everything. So when you're doing your stuff at university, you might have an invented client, and they might come into the crit and give you a bit of feedback, but really they're not real clients, are they? When you've got someone that's putting down, I don't know whether it's a massive corporate thing and they're putting billions of pounds into an investment and they're trying to see their profits, or whether you have someone that's investing their life savings or taking out a massive mortgage in order to do the work. These are things that you don't consider, unless they're real, you don't consider them at university. So working within a budget, working to deliver a brief as well for people. And actually, it's not, in my situation, when I do a lot of domestic work, it's not my house. I'm not going to live there. And so I can advise people and really show them stuff that maybe they haven't considered before.
Yeah.
But and sometimes it may feel like I'm lecturing people, or sometimes you might even end up having to resolve disputes between two
Family
partners
members
that don't necessarily see the project the same way and want different things out of the project. There's lots in it, and until you actually deal with people, it's dealing with people.
Yeah.
When you're at university, you don't really deal with people. Everything's just, I mean, it's amazing fun, but it's not real.
Yeah.
And you gain lots of the skills, like I said. I mean, going to a crit and justifying stuff, working hard to deliver deadlines. You know, architecture's a really tough degree.
Yeah.
We work in, as far as I could see, we were working a lot harder than all the other students.
Yeah, I mean, I know some people that did architecture at university, and it seems like it's the same. Like they were literally selling their soul to complete these portfolios and stuff. It's like 7 years.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends on what school you go to. But I went to a Scottish university, so we did 4 years, and then we did a year out in between the third and fourth year. It wasn't quite a year out. It was like a term, summer, and a term. So that I suspect the university could get fees for the whole year without teaching you for the whole year.
Yeah.
And then you came back and did your diploma after 2 years. I mean, but you could leave with a degree. And I've got friends that left with degrees and went off to do other things. I mean, because of skills, critical thinking, design, presentation, problem solving, all of that good.
Very applicable.
It is, yeah. I think so. And then I think, yeah, it is a great degree whether you're going to be an architect or not. And I'm trying to think of what my peers are doing now. I mean,
yeah, how many of them have stayed within architecture?
A fair few. I've got someone that does CGIs for sort of Hollywood movies now. People that a guy that does woodwork. Plenty of joiners, people that have gone into sort of property management and investment and that side of the property business.
So you can see how they're still honing on that knowledge from that degree.
I guess it is. Yeah, you are. I think, I guess the people that really, really loved it, or that I think really, really loved that experience of working all those late nights and delivering those projects and taking real ownership. I mean, a lot of those are the people like me that are the sole practitioners now. Because a fair few of us are sole practitioners, and we're sort of the ones that always seem to be in the studio back in the day.
Yeah.
And I guess our life, as sad as it is, sort of hasn't changed to that degree.
Would you say that you have the same sort of interest as you did back then? You're still following the...
I was... no, I think things have changed. Because for a start, I was in my 20s then, wasn't I? And now you sort of look at the world as completely different as well.
Yeah.
The world back then, I mean, I think we were just trying to do... And when I graduated, it was, 99 for my second degree. And new Labour had just come into London and work, and there was so much going on and so much aspiration. And we were all getting more experience than we could handle. And lots of us were working on really big jobs and all that. Now, I would say, and certainly at school, we were really, really sort of trying to do fantastical things. And not necessarily responsible things.
Yeah.
I can remember at school, back in the early 90s, we had an environmental management course. And it was very dry, but it was just at the start of trying to think about making buildings more environmentally friendly and zero emissions.
Yeah.
All of that in the early days. And I guess the two didn't go together for me. You couldn't do one and be exciting, and I really wanted to be exciting. I really wanted to be as outrageous as I possibly could, because I was never going to get an opportunity again. Now my thinking has completely changed. I think that as a profession, and I think it's probably self-induced, but the profession has worked. The RIBA building regulations are tightening up, but everyone is pointing in the direction of making buildings. Well, obviously we've got to be net zero, haven't we? But
you mentioned in our pre-meet chat that you have a passive house accreditation.
I don't yet.
Oh, you don't yet?
I don't yet. No, I am doing it, but when I have the time, that's another thing. But I have a client that wants me to design a passive house, and they've told me to because I designed, and actually, I mean, I designed everything in mind from day one to really take on some of those theories.
Yeah.
Because it makes it a lot more easy in the long run.
Could you tell our listeners a little bit about what passive house technologies actually are?
Well, I mean, effectively, it's about having an energy footprint of zero. I mean, there is a criteria, that there's a quantitative criteria about the actual number of kilowatts that a house can. I don't have it on the tip of my tongue, but effectively, there is a definition that defines it as being a house which uses a certain number of kilowatts to basically run itself. So that will be through reducing. It's not about microgeneration necessarily. So it's not about putting solar panels on everything. It's not about having wind turbines everywhere, but it's about reducing the demand. So you super insulate. You use heat that's being generated through the use of the building to just you use air source heat pumps as well. So and then those are run off solar, but you should need next to nothing to run it. Okay. So it's not about just basically cranking up the amount of energy that you generate on site in order to feed the house. It's still as sort of got. It's not carbon, but an energy footprint that you're just getting from the sun.
And who is really pushing for passive house technologies? Is it
I think
planners?
Okay. I think clients are, and I think planners like to say in their local plans that they're targeting net zero, and they should be. So I mean, it's definitely got to be front and centre of their thinking. But actually, when it comes down to it, and I work with a lot of existing buildings as well, because I mean, obviously in London, you'll work with existing buildings primarily. But when you want to extend houses and you need to deliver a really low carbon footprint, you're going to have to make your fabric thicker. So when you're designing lofts and you want to give people headroom, you're going to have to design bigger, thicker fabric, and your extensions get bigger. And I've been having a long-standing debate, an email conversation with a particular planner in a particular London borough. And I sort of probably about a year and a half ago, I explained to him that, well, one of the reasons why some of the things that we're doing just don't appear like they used to, and why we can't deliver what you're asking for in your supplementary planning document, which basically sets out the parameters to which you can generally build, although there is a little bit of leeway. But generally, it's like a rule of thumb. So if you put, say, a dormer on the back of your house, you've got to have it a certain distance below the original roof line. Because you're super insulating, you're getting closer and closer. And now we're sort of at the limit, and we're pushing beyond the limit of what you can really deliver. And deliver the plans what they want to see visually. And so I've sort of been priming the planners for ages, and then maybe about 3 or 4 months ago, I got an email back saying, "Oh, is that email that you sent me like 18 months ago? Is that the reason why I'm seeing all these applications that are sort of this big and don't necessarily comply with the supplementary planning document?" And the answer is yes. So the planners have to think. Well, no, I'm not going to tell them what they have to do, but I believe that if they wanted to deliver net zero, I mean, one of the ways that they can do is to allow people to improve their homes, to make them more energy efficient. And if that means, unfortunately, homes don't necessarily look like they looked in the 19th century as they used to look, well, I guess what's most important to you?
Yeah.
That's the question. And most of my stuff is, well, all of my stuff is very respectful, but sometimes it takes a different view, but it's a different perspective from maybe what the design and conservation officers want.
Is it a lot more time consuming designing a house with passive house like technologies?
Yeah, like I say, most of my stuff is existing, so it's very hard to deliver on. No, I think it's difficult to deliver on existing projects, on existing buildings. So new build, but what you do is you go in from the start, and it has to be from day one. You have to do it from the outset.
Okay.
And then, hopefully, it just becomes natural to everyone, and it just becomes what you need to do. I can remember the days when we designed cavity walls that were really skinny and hardly had any insulation in, and now they're fatter and they need more. So it's just something that I think one thing I mentioned when we spoke before was, and this is probably a slightly political point, but I think that sort of the current moves from the government to change the goalposts aren't helpful. I would rather have something really high to aim at and know that I've got to deliver that from now, rather than having to, because the building regulations get revised so often that you're just constantly revising what you're doing, and you're not learning. You're sort of learning on the job in a way. I'd just much rather people told us that you need to deliver this, and whether it's 10, 15, 20 years ahead of what we think we might need now.
Yeah.
At least everybody knows it, and everyone that has a building project now knows that building project is good for 30, 40, 50 years, which is what we should be thinking about anyway. We shouldn't really be building stuff which is going to be obsolete in 10 years or 15 years, should we? So
it's just wasteful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned before that you did a sabbatical in the South Pacific. Could you tell us a little bit about that and your work-life balance?
Yeah. I spoke about being a sole practitioner, and one of the reasons why that is because of our time in the Pacific. Because up until that point, I'd always worked for people, and I probably ended up as a sole practitioner way later than I needed to do. But I had a kick to do it.
Yeah.
So my wife works for, or at the time worked for the UN, and we got at short notice, at 6 weeks' notice, she got invited to go and work in Solomon Islands, which is basically beyond Papua New Guinea, way out in the Pacific, and we didn't even really know where it was. But so we had 6 weeks to pack up, agree a sabbatical with my employer, which sort of worked out in that I got my job back when we came back in between. And
who was it you were working with at the time?
So I was working with a practice just down the corner in Holborn, actually. So we were a small practice. I'm not mentioning any names, but we were a small practice, maybe 5 or 6 people. So I was a big part. I beneath the practice principal, I was the most senior person then. So it was a big thing for him to let me go at 6 weeks' notice. It was amazing of him, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I did go back, and then but by the time I went back, I sort of discovered a different work-life balance as well.
Yeah.
And because you're going to the Solomon Islands, I couldn't work as an architect. There was no real work as an architect. Plus the visa with the UN, our spouses weren't allowed to work.
Okay.
So I homeschooled the children. So back then, how old they've been? They would have been 7, 7, 5, and 2. Yeah, 7, 5, and 2. So
did you have any experience with
homeschooling?
Teaching?
No, not at all. No. We're certainly not at that age group anyway. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Anyway, I can remember arriving in Honiara at the airport, and then my wife suddenly we weren't at the airport, we were at the UN offices, and my wife got whisked off straight into a meeting after a 23-hour journey to get there. And then I was just left with a 2-year-old had filled her nappy.
Oh God!
In the UN toilet, where they don't have in South Pacific, they don't have baby changing facilities at all. And I didn't have any of the equipment I did, but just got on with it. But yeah, so work-life balance, it sort of switched everything on its head.
Yeah.
And coming back, from Solomon Islands, we ended up in Fiji, and the same deal as well, just homeschooling. but with a few more facilities in Fiji. I mean, Solomon Islands is one of those places that I can remember when we left Solomon's. Me and my son, we were both in tears because it was like the love. You would never see a place like that ever again. Things change so quickly in the world. You'll never. It's a place that the likes of which we never saw and we'd never see again. We sort of knew that at the time when we left.
Yeah.
Fiji was much more developed. They had, Fiji and Suva, they've got 3 cinemas, which is 3 more than Lucian's got. And they had McDonald's and stuff, and all the stuff but different. But Solomon Islands was, and I homeschooled, and we homeschooled very, very hands-on, practically. So it would be a very practical education, teaching them about volcanoes, which their class was learning about at school by actually going to a volcano and walking in.
That's awesome.
And smelling the sulfur.
Wow.
Trying to find the source of the Lunga River and looking at the crocodiles and it was amazing.
Did you find you learned a lot yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I learned a lot about myself, about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it, what brought flashbacks of that period was COVID as well. Because when COVID struck, and I was still, by then I'd sort of set up the practice. I still had plenty of work though, and I was working for myself, but at the same time, everyone was around. I mean, in Solomon's, there were, in the whole of Solomon Islands, I think there were 65 Britons in the whole of Solomon Islands. We were sort of numbers 60 to 64. So, so the 5 of us. There wasn't a big expat community or anything. So we were literally ourselves as a family, as that little network. Because we left at 6 weeks' notice, our stuff didn't arrive for ages. We were sort of living very much on the hoof.
Goodness. In
our own little bubble, our own team. And when COVID happened, it sort of felt a bit like that as well. And I know these things sort of change your perspective on what's important. And that's for me personally, but I also know that it's changed things for clients as well. And I think their time at home, which is why I think sort of COVID didn't bring the massive drop off in work that I was fearing, because I'm in the domestic sector. I think people were stuck in their homes thinking about what's really important to us. Where do we spend most of our time? Where do we want to spend most of our times? And it wasn't necessarily in the office. I mean, ironically, I had a boss who was a developer architect, and he was really, really commercially minded and really commercially driven. And again, I won't mention names, but he was exceptional because he employed a load of young staff, and we got loads of experience, and it was fantastic for us. But we all hated some elements of it. We all hated it, and we sort of couldn't wait to get out of there. And when we got all our experience, we left. But one thing he told me, ironically, was no one ever, on their deathbeds, no one ever says, I wish I'd spent more time in the office, even though we spent loads of time in the office working for him. But yeah, and I think things like going to the Solomons and Fiji and COVID, we were really fortunate through COVID. We were very careful, and there are other issues there that, lots of people can discuss about their own experiences. But from my experience, we were lucky to have that strong family bond that we developed through our time away.
Yeah.
And work. And I sort of see that in clients, and I like to feel that some of the work that I do helps them foster that a bit more.
Do you think your perspective changed after you came back from the South Pacific?
Oh yeah.
In architecture.
How can it not? Yeah, I mean, we were talking about environmental stuff earlier. While we were there were terrible floods. Climate change. We saw climate change. That's my wife's role was in disaster risk reduction. So I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
And I sort of understand it, and I understood it. Or at least I thought that when you see it, you really understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it in my mind's eye now. I mean, houses washing away into the river, the bridge washing away, and just through rain. And you don't, unless you see it, you don't get a real feel of it. You think you're invincible and you can just carry on as you normally do. And I think that really did make me feel that you can't carry on as you normally do.
Yeah. Because that area has some of the worst flooding in the world, doesn't it? Like,
yeah, in cyclones as well. My wife always gets, I don't know, people call them natural disasters, which gets a bit cross about being natural disasters. And then, but it's also about building resilience into these places as well. I mean, that sort of stuff that she could talk on for hours. But I think maybe that idea of resilience. I mean, maybe we all need a little bit more resilience in our lives, I mean, at various levels. And I think helping people to make their lives a little bit future-proofing.
Like you mentioned before, with the sort of environmental technologies as well, like everything, we need to be looking to the future now.
Yeah, I think so, but not just that. I mean, working with clients, sort of thinking about. I mean, I work with a lot of young families that see their children they're going to be like 3 and 4 years old for the rest of their lives, and they're not going to be. So you sort of think about the way that you design spaces to be relatively flexible. Practical for people in terms of the short term, but also long term. So I was having a chat with clients earlier about sort of the amount of space that they needed and what have you, and thinking about, especially in London, where this is purely selfish, but where are my children going to live? Okay, so it's like the opposite of NIMBYism, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where are our children going to live?
Yeah.
So what? I mean, answer me that. If you're not building homes for people, we're sort of storing up a massive problem for ourselves, aren't we? And it's the same with the environment as well. We're storing up all these problems for ourselves, and it's short term. I think there's always that debate about a waste of money or an investment in the future. I'm always minded to think that it's always an investment in the future.
Yeah. I mean, would you say people are sort of thinking to the future in terms of accommodating their children, even if they're young right now? Are they thinking like, okay, when they are adults, is that something people are taking into consideration, or are they not on that time scale?
More and more so, I would say. People sort of think about, they make decisions like that at every level as to where you can send your children to primary school, dictates where you live in London. There's also, some people have the luxury of being able to make those choices, and I guess a lot of my clients do. These are sort of maybe I'm sort of facilitating them to make these options that they're very lucky to have the options to make.
Yeah.
I've always, having been in the South Pacific before and seen all that, I've since then just really considered myself to be very, very, very lucky, incredibly lucky. I do something that I really enjoy doing. I work with people that I want to work with and that want to work with me, and that's the benefit of being a self-practitioner and being able to. If I meet someone and I really don't get a good, and they might not get a good vibe for me, so maybe I would never get the job anyway. But I can. I'm in that lucky position where at the moment I can say no to work, and even if it goes quiet. And we have to sort of tighten our belts a bit. At least, it goes quiet. I can spend more time doing other things that are important to me.
Yeah, definitely. Just to wrap up, what advice would you give to a young professional in the architecture industry or someone thinking about going into it?
Get as much good experience as you can. I guess rather than people have different perspectives on this. So you might want to work with prestigious practice so that you can put it on your CV and it might lead to the next job. That's fair enough. But I don't know how much experience you'd get within that environment.
Do you mean in terms of like summer, work experience?
Yeah, even when I mean, I don't know what the sort of work market is like at the moment. I can imagine it's really, really tough. When I left uni, like I say, it was sort of at the millennium, turn of the millennium. There was so much work out there that we were basically choosing who we applied to, and we got our jobs where we chose to. So that's not the case now. I know that's not the case now. So I mean, maybe that's advice for an ideal world. But if you can, work somewhere where you get really good experience and you meet clients and you're responsible for, as much as you can be, as much as you can take on, in terms of, so advice for people getting into the profession. It depends on what age. I mentioned before about there being different types of school, but that's a good thing, because it doesn't matter whether you feel you're really artistic or whether you're really scientific or whether you enjoy sort of the debates around architecture and the philosophy of architecture. You'll find a school that will be able to do that for you. So, don't necessarily restrict your choices according to what wanting to get things. Choose what you're really interested in to study. It might be by the time you get down to making those applications to university that you're not going to study architecture anyway.
But it's just ticking things off a list, trying to deduce what you actually do want to do.
But then again, architecture is a really broad field as well. It's really, I mean, certainly the degree that I did was opened up doors for lots of people to do lots of other things as well. So some people get to architecture school, I guess, and they find that they really, really don't like it. But then again, I had lots of people that went off and did other degrees after a term. I think, apply to what you really, really want to do and suck it and see. And it's different. Everything is different now. We didn't pay fees. It's the way. I mean, I'm in this debate because my son is applying to go to university next year. So it's a completely different landscape. I keep saying this, we were really, really lucky. And I find it really...
It's very sad.
And the other thing about architecture is it's a long course and people are going to be put off it. So
it's a lot of money.
Even in my day, you looked around the studio and you looked at the schools that my peers went to and the family backgrounds that they had. It was super, super affluent, super middle class. And I think it's only going to get more so because people back then, fees weren't paying for fees, but it's much more. And I hope that this debate doesn't put people off though, because ultimately, if you go to university and you earn X amount, I know they're tightening it up now, so it's less of a free hit in a way. But that idea of sort of student loans being effectively a graduate tax, and once you earn up to a certain point, then you won't feel it, and you will feel it more because they're changing the rules. But I'd hate to think that people's backgrounds or people's family wealth dictated the sort of the next generation, who the next generation, what the next generation of architects looks like. I mean, you listen tonight might not be able to tell, but for my name they might do. But I'm of Indian origin, and I saw very few people like me back then. I think that, one thing that always amuses me is when I turn up to site in the first meeting, and I know people often, not obviously the main contractors, but someone on site might assume that I work for local authority. I'm from building control or something.
Oh, really?
So a lot of people don't assume I'm the architect. They don't think that I'm the architect. I'd like that to be much more. I mean, I'm glad to say that the profession's taking, a much more proactive approach. And especially in terms of gender equality as well. When I was at school, I think at the class of 48, there were 12 women. I guess I could say girls because they were 18 at the time, on the course. And now I think it's much more like, it would be much more like 50-50 split. And whether that continues into the workplace, I think that's the next challenge for the industry, which certainly is nowhere near that. And thinking back to a lot of those people that I said that weren't in architecture that I studied with, I would say that a lot of them I'm trying to think of the women that I studied with. Still, yeah, it's not a large percentage of them that's still in architecture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's all we have time for today, but thank you so much for coming on, Neel. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, so I got on a bit of a rant.
No, it's really interesting, and I'm sure our listeners will find it very enlightening as well.
Don't be disheartened. It's a challenge to yourself to actually get on and do it. Because, I mean, unless somebody challenges these conceptions about who is going to be the next generation of architects, then nothing's going to change.
Got to grab the bull by the horns.
Yeah.
Well, yes, thank you so much, and we will see you on our next episode of The London Architect.